You're listening to BCN, Boston Caribbean Network Radio.
Bonsoir tout le monde, bienvenue pour l'autre émission En Cause. Bon dimanche. Mais avant de commencer, je vais commencer pour me dire toute maman haïtienne nous belle femme créole moi yo joyeuse fête des mères. Happy Mother's Day. Femme haïtienne nous aime nous en pile, c'est maman qui baille la vie, c'est ou même qui baille. Nous connaissons maman haïtienne yo travail dur. Toute maman travail dur, mais jodi nous a fêter spécialement toute maman haïtienne. M'voye di maman bonne fête des mères, m'voye di ma tante moi yo k'ap gade, tout monde, toute femme haïtienne, femme voye nous bonne fête des mères, souhaiter nous fêter nous bien fêter jodi an. Souhaiter petite nous te montrer nous plus l'amour que montrer nous à l'ordinaire, que nous te yo te ba nous en pile fleurs, nous al manger, n'a passé une très bonne journée et kounya nous chita nous relax, n'a gade en cause. Nous connaissons chaque dimanche toujours une émission spéciale pour vous parce que nous essayons dans Boston Caribbean Network pour nous toujours faire une émission très spéciale. Malgré ces fêtes des mères, mais topic là pour aujourd'hui pas sous fête des mères parce que nous essayons porter information pour vous amener pour nous éclaircir, pour nous encourager et pour nous encourager à occuper tête ou prendre soin de tête. Jeudi, Robert papa avec nous, il a pris un petit temps, il a un petit voyage parce qu'on connaît li bon pour faire petit détente sur Robert, n'a pensé avant pour faire un bon voyage et n'a nous pour l'autre émission En Cause. Jeudi invité son invité très spécial, m'bral introduire topic là qui n'a parlé jeudi c'est santé mentale avec Gason. Mais spécifiquement Gason haïtien. So black men and mental health. Haitian Men and Mental Health. Émission nous connaît le dimanche toujours bilingue parce que des fois nous gagnons invité qui plus confortable en anglais. Donc m'a essayé tout ça me capable pour me parler créole pour me traduire mais plus émission en anglais jeudi. So excusez-nous amis qui plus confortable avec créole. Même ta souhaité me penser en pile mon a besoin de bagay dans émission ça parce que nous avons pile information qui nous porter pour si vous avez un jeune petit monde la caillou jeune petit garçon surtout encourager pour regarder émission ça parce que nous avons un jeune homme qui c'est un haïtien américain I should say. Li c'est un licensed therapist. So jeudi il parle ba nous ti lumière sur santé mentale avec Gason dans la communauté noire. So m'a commencé pour m'introduire Malcolm Joseph. Welcome Malcolm, who is a licensed independent clinical social worker. He is has done a lot of work in the community. He has worked with Haitian families, and I am so grateful to you, Malcolm, for agreeing to join us today and to shed some light on a subject that I feel like we should talk more about in our community. So why don't you start, even though I didn't a great job with introducing you, but why don't you start by introducing yourself and a little bit about your background?
Yep. So born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts.
To Haitian parents?
To Haitian parents, yep.
Dis-moi petit bagage en créole pour mieux qu'on écoute parler un petit créole.
You put me on the spot. No, I'm not doing it. So.
Ou ka di bonjour.
Bonjour, bonne fête des mères.
Okay, good job. Yep. See.
So my mom's from Port-au-Prince. My father's from Cap Haïtien. They came here when they were teenagers, fell in love, had me, and education is very important in the Haitian community. So went to college, Boston College, got my bachelor's and my master's. I always knew I wanted to help people, and I found my way of helping people with social work. And social work is just finding ways to help people with resources, helping them through any tough moment in their lives, giving them what they need to take the next step. So that's what a social worker does in a lot of different ways. I've been doing that since 2009, so 10 plus years of being a social worker, whether that's counseling, one-on-one, working with families. I worked in the court system, juvenile court system. For those that don't know, that's just another way of just young people that commit crimes instead of going to jail, they are part of the juvenile justice system. And then, what else have I done? I was a nonprofit director for a program working with young people also, and now I work in a hospital.
Yes.
So.
Well, Malcolm so te introduit tête li là, même juste pas un petit highlight de créole, lui c'est un jeune homme dans la communauté a, maman le papa fait Haïti, venu ici comme adolescent, yo rencontré, yo fait li et puis il étudié dans Boston College, so connaît une grande école dans Boston. Et puis depuis là était jeune, il était toujours besoin aider communauté a, so il fin étudier social work, travail social, il prend licence li, il travaille dans différents domaines dans santé mentale. So c'est un monde qui gagne expérience là et il gagne formation yo, il était même travaille dans court, la cour tribunal, merci. Tribunal et il travaille avec jeunes Timon, en pile fois les jeunes Timon yo fait crime, so il était contre travail dans tribunal, so il gagne expérience li ouais en pile bagarre dans communauté so ça fait m'encourager nous si nous gagne jeunes Timon là quand nous jeunes petits garçons surtout ni petits filles tout encourage regarder émission ça parce que li important parce que nous besoin tout prendre soin tête nous n'a prendre soin l'autre so dans BC nous essayer de partager information. So avant de commencer, qui ça qui santé mentale? Santé mentale c'est capacité au monde pour sentir, pour penser et puis genre agir et qui genre ou naviguer la vie, en réalité la vie. So nous pourrons parler plus en anglais, mais essayer de traduire here and there, but most of the time it will be in English. So if you want to describe mental health, you know, how would you describe mental health? Oh, we're changing. Just give us a minute. We're changing the mic? Okay. How would you describe mental health, you know, if you were to describe it in your own words to help our friends understand?
Whenever I was working with families, especially one-on-one with them, I would describe it as, because there's a stigma around it, making people think you're crazy, like ufu, and you're not. This is something common that everyone goes through. So the way that I describe it is whether there is I call it the 3 S's: safety, structure, support, right? If there's something that impacts how safe you feel, is there something that impacts the structure that's in your life, like the day-to-day, go to school, go to work? If there's something that impacts the support system that you have, to me, that is a crisis or something that you could use help in. And so the way I think of mental health is not just problem tetu, it's not that, it's the things that impact you.
So your environment
Your
too.
environment, yeah. It's not just what's in your head, it's your environment.
Yeah.
So that's what I think about when I think of mental health. So things that impact how you feel.
So the exterior and how it impacts your interior.
Yeah, and how you overcome those things. If you're struggling with any of those things, you know, we call that mental health. Like you're struggling, we want you to feel like you have the strength and the resources to overcome any of those things that might be impacting you in your life. That's what I think mental health is.
So what, and this is more of a personal opinion, you know, I'm asking you to share. And again, I want to remind our friends that this is a conversation, although, you know, I have a background in mental health, Malcolm does, but we're not your specific treaters. We're not here to diagnose anyone. We're not here, we don't know your personal life story. So whatever we say, please don't take it and put it into your own story. You know, I'd encourage people to talk to your physicians, talk to a counselor that knows your personal story. This is general information that could be helpful, that could help someone seek some help, but at the same time, we want you to connect with your doctors if you are struggling with any of the things that we will be talking about. So Malcolm, why do you think, because based on the definition, how you defined it, obviously as human beings, we're all impacted by our environment. So why is it that, and I'm sure that's a loaded question, that it's such a stigma in our community? And when I say our community, I'm talking about the Black community as well as specifically the Haitian community.
That's a very, very good question. I think if we think about, first, you could break it down by, you know, first the American society, Black Americans, and then think about the Haitian community. So let's talk first about the African American community. So we know the history of America is rooted in racism. We're not just talking about slavery, we're talking about the racism in the medical field as well. So the impact and access to good health or good health resources or insurance. The mistreatment of the Black body in the medical field too, in the science community. When we think about all that, on top of the fact that more rates of Black Americans live in poverty, right? More suffer through violence in urban communities, and the rates of that's why the stigma exists. So asking for help in the Black American community is almost like a sign of weakness, given all that has happened. And it's not so different from how Haitian Americans think, or how the Haitian community thinks. Having an issue with mental health is, again, almost like a sign of weakness. It could be viewed as a sign of weakness. It could also be viewed as going to asking for help from somebody. Do they understand my culture, right? And the things that I feel like impact me. There could also be the same thought that in the Haitian community, that when you're struggling, it's something that's outside of you. It's like a curse or voodoo, or someone's doing something to you. It's not something that is something that might be happening to you, something that might be missing in you, or the chemical imbalances. The Haitian community does not fully understand that. And I know we'll delve deep into why men specifically in the Haitian community and the Black community suffer with this too, or why more rates of them suffer with mental health and don't get the treatment.
They suffer in silence.
Yeah, and so, but that could be said of like Haitian Americans, Haitians, as well as Black Americans too. So those are the reasons why they don't seek out help in the traditional way.
And I think you've touched upon it. The fact that you said weakness, I think, traditionally, I'm not a man, but I know men. And weakness, no man wants to feel like to show any sign of weakness, to feel like they're weak, which I think that's a misinterpretation of it all, because that's not, for you to be able to verbalize, hey, I'm struggling, that's not a sign of weakness. That actually, it takes a lot of courage to verbalize that. So, just going back to men and mental health, so would you say that's the same correlation with the level of thinking that it's a weakness, thus I'm not going to ask for help?
Yeah, it's the same thought process that goes into it. It looks like it's weakness. It's not the traditional way that men would seek help if they had issues with something, right? They may go to a friend, they may go to a pastor, they may use or misuse substances and drugs as a way to cope, right? But it's the stigma of seeking help in the traditional way, where you can get more access to something that might be beneficial to you, that has impacted people of color in the Haitian community, or not people of color, but the people in the Haitian community, or the African American community, just men in general. Those are the things that impact them getting the help. So that stigma is such strong, even though I've done my research, so the numbers may be increasing as people are becoming more aware of mental health, as people are becoming more aware of they're seeing people around them getting help in the traditional way. That number is increasing. People are getting help, but that stigma is so strong, and that fear and the impact of racism, and the lack of people who look like them treating them it plays a factor too. So
there's
it's
a lot there to unpack.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. No, but that's to answer your question. That's the reason specifically for men why it's even harder to access the help, or to go seek out help in those traditional kind of way, whether it's financial, whether it's emotional, the attitude towards help. Those are the things that impacted a lot.
So can we go back to even the way that we raised our young boys? Because in Black and Haitian communities, we definitely raise boys differently than we raise girls, if we're going to look at the gender roles. So what are some of the things that, from working with children, that you've noticed in the way that kind of eventually impact them once they get older in just the way that they're being raised? Because I feel like often boys are not encouraged to express themselves or be emotional or cry and actually verbalize or even learn to recognize their feelings in order to even verbalize that. So what are some of the things that you've experienced in your work, in your line of work when you worked with kids?
I think the things, I agree with what you're saying. I think in the Caribbean household, specifically in the Haitian household, children are usually seen, not heard, so they don't really have a voice. And I'm not saying that's a stigma against all Haitians. That's just usually what I've seen.
It's a common thing,
right? And when we think about gender roles in the Haitian community, right, or just in the American society, we know females are more allowed to be emotional than men are. It's that cultural aspect of mental health and of growing up that adds that layer of stigma to it. So young boys aren't allowed to be emotional or dramatic, or when they are emotional, it jumps to anger. It looks like anger. But what we're missing is the pain, the sadness, the hopelessness, the worthlessness that may come from as a reaction of that anger. And that's why it just looks like anger. So they look like they're exploding. And so that's why it's, in my opinion, it's really important to, especially in the Haitian household, to allow your child a voice in a safe way, to allow them a chance to express their emotions and to be comfortable having those conversations. I remember for myself in my own household, my father was raised in a certain kind of way, right? Where it was very, very strict. And he was unable to show his emotions, which impacted me as someone that was growing up, and who do I go to when I'm feeling some kind of way. Black teens, especially young people, though they may not, they don't commit suicide at higher rates than white teens, they still, as a population, still have reports of attempting suicide. And if we think about why people do that, because of the pain that they may be suffering, we have to keep in mind, are we allowing, as like Haitian parents or in a Haitian household, are we allowing a chance to talk about all the things that we can talk about, all the things that we are struggling with, whether that's poverty, violence, substance abuse. It's important to talk trauma. It's important to talk about those things, so that way we are teaching them how to do it. So again, to answer your question, I think when we think about young boys and young men in Haitian households, it's even more important that we're not just talking about it's okay to cry. And I don't want to just forget about the other children in the household either, like the young girls and young women.
Like boys and girls
today
should
we're
have
talking
conversations.
About men, but, it impacts men so greatly because when we don't address those things, like I said, it looks like anger, it looks like self-harm, it looks like you're misusing people around you, right? And we already have, and at least in America, young men of color are incarcerated at higher rates than anyone else. So there's a lot to unpack, but it's important that it starts with just a conversation. Are we giving space to talk about the things that are tough to talk about in a Haitian household? Because things happen.
They do.
But if we don't talk about it, if we only say like, oh, let's pray about it, if we only say,
nothing's wrong with prayer.
Nothing's wrong with prayer.
But,
no, nothing's wrong with that.
Yeah,
like I want to make sure that's a way to cope. But when it continues to be a problem, when someone is still suffering quietly, are we opening up our family or ourselves to other ways to help?
Safe space.
Are we talking about like, let's talk to the pastor. Let's also talk to a teacher. Let's also talk to a therapist. Let's also talk to your doctor. Let's get a community approach to making sure that we have what we need to get beyond this moment.
And we're not even just talking about conversation using the blame language, it's really helping your kids to identify their feelings, because we teach you help your child to learn how to walk. You teach your kid to recognize when they're hungry. You help your kids understand and recognize when they need to use the restroom. But then I think when it comes to identifying their feelings and emotions, we ignore that.
But like, think about who taught our parents? Like, who taught my father to raise children in an emotional way?
Yeah.
Right? But then that's it. Like, I fed you and I gave you life.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you to go to school, I'm bringing you to school, and you have clothes on your back.
Yeah.
But then there's the other side of parenting, which is like, in America anyway, there's that emotional side of parenting.
Not just America, as humans, you know. So n'a parlé, m'a rappelé les amis, on a parlé avec Malcolm Joseph, qui c'est un licensed clinical social worker, n'a parlé de santé mentale avec jeune garçon. So nous font tirer là sur qui ça en pile fois qui empêcher jeune garçon pour yo aller chercher aide là yo gen problème avec santé mentale. En pile fois yo pas ka identifier, gens yo senti yo qui ça yo senti yo. En pile fois tout yo penser si yo dit yo gon problème mental, ça c'est lui montrer son faiblesse. Et so nous font tirer là sous gens les n'a élevé ti moun. En pile fois nous élever ti fille ti garçon différent, mais nous communauté nous a gen en pile opportunité pour nous apprendre parler avec petite nous, parler avec ensemble comme famille, encourager ti moun yo pour yo identifier émotion yo, et puis créer un environnement qui stable, qui gagne sécurité pour yo ka express parler pour yo di qui émotion que yo senti, parce que en pile fois là ou kebe tout bagay en dedans ou vient exploser, et puis ça vient paraître tant que c'est colère, c'est fâché, mais pile fois mon pas compte qui ça ka passer en dedans tête li ça qui j'en li senti, so li parce que le pas gen langage là, et puis en pile fois ça vient arriver dans moment li vient trop, et puis ou bien en pile jeune petit monde qui vient faire crime, yo en prison, ou bien qui vient mettre tête dans situation yo pas ta doué. So li commence la caille pour nous parler avec ti moun yo. Ngane nous dans communauté haïtienne nous en pile nous religieux, nous à l'église nous gen pasteur, nous gen prêtre, nous parler avec eux, mais nous pas encourager ti moun yo pour gen conversation. Dans communauté nous Malcolm so dit là, maman faut papa faut yo dit m'bo caille pour être m'bo manger ou gen radoudo, c'est l'école pour aller, et puis that's it. But faut songer ti moun vinn grandi puis yo vinn grand monde. So pendant on grandi, c'est là ça va pas apprendre qui gens pour venir love une grand monde dans société et pas laisser pour venir apprendre pour capable reconnaître émotion. C'est un bagage pour apprendre depuis leur petit. So m'ai besoin de dire ça en créole parce que pour monde qui ont des gens plus créole là plus confortable, même ta souhaité nous rester toujours branché parce que nous grand pile causer pour nous parler toujours. I just wanted to make sure our friends understood. So going back to raising kids and creating an environment to help them be able to identify their emotions. So from working in the court system, what were some of the things that you've encountered, and how were you able, at least some of the success stories, hopefully there were some success stories that you were able to identify, and what were the approaches that were taken by you as the provider, also with the parents? I know it's a multifaceted question, but do your best to answer.
So even in the juvenile court system, it's still more young men of color, right, than it is white children. Even black females, it's the same thing. The numbers are still high. There's a disparity there. We know all the disparities include over policing, over criminalization of simple crimes or crimes that white counterparts don't get the same sentence for. When it came to the men I was working with, so I worked with the families before I became the director of the program. When I worked with the families, a lot of we know that there's some situations that create stressful environments, and it's not always these stressful environments that have this outcome, but these are some things that we notice. So these are people living in communities where there's more crime. These are people who usually is a single parent household. That's usually a mom, a woman of color. We know that there's either issues with substance abuse within the family dynamic, issues with mental health that don't get talked about in that environment. And almost like what you were saying, when even if the parents who struggle on their own with things don't have the proper access to traditional help, that could still find a way to explode in their family. Because the way that I view it is, the sins of the parents come from the sins of the parents come from the sins of their parents. There's something that hasn't been worked out that the family is trying to figure out, and it's going to keep repeating itself. So to answer your question, so some of the things that I saw and the strategies I used was, whether it was always successful or not, like you were saying, is let's just create a space to talk about some things. I'm thinking of one family, I'm going to try not to say too much, but I'm thinking of one family where, again, a single mother in a household raising her children. Her child was involved in the system. The teenager was involved in the court, and the way that I saw her anger expressed, I saw it as anger. The mom may not have saw that as anger, just a disrespectful child. But the things that she was doing may have looked like disrespect to the mom. It was more about their relationship and the lack of the relationship that they had. This girl felt like a black sheep. Now, if we take out the girl and put in, you could put in anybody. If we're focusing on black men's mental health and why it's important to talk about and create a space for your kids to talk. When children, especially boys, suffer alone with feelings of, I'm not loved in this house, I don't love myself, I feel worthless, and more black teens express feeling that more so than white teens. And there's a lot of reasons for that. That creates a situation that I'm talking about, like you have a child who's acting out and it feels like they're out of control.
And often too, like you mentioned, you know, your parents, nobody taught your dad how to raise children, and people are generally not, there's no class. There are classes.
There's classes,
but
there's
for the
books,
most
but every child is different.
Yeah, for the most part, people are not taking classes in the raising children. And I don't want to just for us to stay on raising children. So I want to identify some of the things that people suffer with in silence, and they don't necessarily seek help. You know, I forgot what article I was reading. Depression is like, it's chaos, it's running rampage in the black community, and that's something that people never want to talk about, and depression kills. So let's talk more about depression as far as like black men and some of the reasons. And I think again we go back, you know, to fear that people have, and they don't want to feel like they're weak. But I want to talk about some of the signs that people need to watch out for if they're feeling depressed, and just encouraging folks to seek help, because there's no shame. Just like when you're physically ill, you call your doctor. You have a headache, you have a stomachache, you call your doctor. If you are feeling the following emotions that we'll talk about, then you talk to your doctor first, and then you get connected to a counselor.
I think I kind of already touched on it. When you feel like, first off, we have to describe what's depression, right? So the signs of depression is not having the energy to do the things that you used to do, an overwhelming sense of sadness that lasts longer, usually longer than like a week. And then, is it impacting other areas of your life? Are you unable to go to work? Are you unable to care for your kids? Are you unable to go to church? Are you unable to go to school, right?
So I want to translate. You know, m'vle traduire parce que nous commençons à parler de dépression. Dépression sont maladies qui a fait un pile ravage dans la communauté, et un pile fois nous ignorer. So si que Malcolm dit que normalement il faut aller à docteur pour docteur diagnoser avec dépression, but si commencer ouais symptômes ça ou activité qui normalement qu'on remet que ou pas intéressé avec encore, si ou senti ou entristé, ou quand on pile fois nous attristé, mais si tristesse ça dure plus qu'une semaine, que ou pas qu'à lever quitter cabanou, même li commence à affecter travail ou li affecter appétit ou, then ça son notion qui gon bagay qui pas normal, li ta bon parler avec docteur. Go ahead, Malcolm.
Yep. When we think about young men and young boys, we already talked about how it's difficult. They're not always allowed to express their emotions. They're not in the same way that females are. So depression looks different, right? What it can look like is issues with school, like poor grades, issues with friends, like are they fighting, right? It looks more like acting out, right? You're not coming home on time, right? Problem with drug use and drinking, involvement with some friends that might be high risk friends, like friends that like keep up on pool. That's what it would look like for men and for young boys if they don't have the words to say I'm feeling some kind of way, right?
Pour jeunes petits garçons, dépression gen doit symptôme dépression gen doit paraître différent. Et again tout le monde dépression gen doit différent dans tout le monde mais some symptôme qui ont en général parce que parents da encourager nous pour nous apprendre comme petit nous pour nous connaître qui activité qui gens yo agi. Soit un changement dans comportement petit tout. Tant que si il commence l'école il qu'on fait A pluses chaque jour il fait bon il peut bon note ba ou pour un autre là commence à changer que qu'on y a pile classe li a difficulté dans l'école là soit un changement dans groupe amis que l'idée qu'on a passé temps avec eux ça a changé pour ouais tant qu'on pile fois jeune si moun pas gain mot pour express qui ça yo sentir mais c'est plus ces comportements qui changer ça t'a supposé ba ou une petite idée pour dire ah bon mal checker sur ça.
So we talked about the friends, the things that they might be doing, and are they keeping to themselves more so than they used to? Those could be signs of depression, and it's a stigma. It's tough to talk about it as a black man saying like, I don't feel well, I don't feel good, I'm worried about what I'm feeling. And so for the young people who may be watching or for the people who may be helping young people or have young people in their lives, the first message is to always say, if you're ever feeling something, talk to somebody about it. Don't ever suffer alone because there's a lot of ways people could help you. And I really want to make sure that in the Haitian community, we're not keeping it to just how we used to do it. If you're feeling some kind of way, take this medicament, right? And that's it, right? And we're done, right? If you're feeling some kind of way, go to church. You're not praying hard enough. I'm not praying hard enough as a parent, right? And so you even feel like you're struggling with your kid too. So I think the most important thing is be open to all the ways that people are here to help you. And that's how we're going to break down the stigma. And I have some more notes about like Haitian men and like how we view mental health. So for Haitian young people, for any young person though, getting speaking to a therapist or speaking to a doctor about how you're feeling is not cool, right? Because it looks like a sign of weakness. Some of the things that make us that impact our mental health is not really related to relationships. It's more related to like the violence in the community or trauma, things that we see that we don't talk about. It may not have happened to us, but we see it happen around us. We see it happen in our home. And it's hard to talk about those things, right?
So I want to make sure I at least say this in Creole. ANPIL fois tout les femmes et familles ou bien garçons haïtiens pensent qu'ils ont un problème avec santé mentale yo peur pour yo parler parce que ça fait ou paraître que yo gain faiblesse. Mais ANPIL fois tout ça qui passe dans environnement nous affecté nous. C'est tout Haïti qu'on y a nous ka dit tout mon Haïti a exposé avec trauma, avec choc. So you know comme être humain c'est it's only so much que cerveau qu'apprend que tout corps qu'apprend comme émotion. So les moun rete non environnement qui grand pile violence ça vient créer un imbalance dans ou même. So en pile fois gen doit ouais tout le monde gérer ça différent. So si ou pas sentir en santé ou pas sentir normal ou qu'on le normal, nous toujours encourager pour parler avec docteur ou parler avec un monde parce que parler c'est comme ça parce que nous gain ça pour nous kembe tout bagay en dedans nous pas vle parler mais l'on parler gen des fois l'on fâché énervé l'on nous parler avec après dans fin conversation ou vinn sentir ou on ti amélioré violence dans kailan tout ka vinn créer on différent bon bagay dans ti moun parce qu'en pile fois pareil ou pas penser que si nous gen violence pas parler juste violence parce que madame a bat mari a bat madame non même violence avec mot que nous utiliser dans kailan si gen on parle que tout a jouer dans bataille ça vinn gen doit avoir un impact sur ti moun et puis ti moun gen doit sentir li pas dans environnement qui gen assez sécurité pour lui parler des émotions pour le cas identifier émotions.
And I think what's important, what you said, is it's the things that we don't talk about that create the difficulty in seeking help, but also it creates untreated anxiety, like fear about getting help, fear about how you're feeling, or the depression that we were talking about. So there are some things in the Haitian household that people have to be able to talk about so that we can create the environment for a young man to be an emotionally grounded person and feel like they know how to seek the help of the people around them.
Absolutely.
So whether that's issues with relationships, issues about sex, issues about mental health, issues about the violence in our home or outside of our home, we have to be able to talk about that because that's what's going to help young men, Haitian young men, seek out help even in the traditional and non-traditional way, because they're not all going to go to church.
That's true, and although church, we encourage church, we encourage faith, but again, the being emotionally aware, having the verbiage to be able to identify your feelings, because I always say feelings are never wrong. We all can have all the feelings that we can feel, but it's really it's your behavior and how do you respond to these feelings. And often because people don't fully understand their feelings, then because you don't understand it, then it becomes chaos in how you're responding to it. And then if you don't have a sense of safety around you, then it just gets worse before it actually gets better. I feel like anxiety is not something that we talk about at all. So let's talk a little bit about anxiety. And if you can kind of break down the definition, as best as you can, for our friends that are watching.
So anxiety is different from nervous. Like, for me, feeling nervous is I know something's going to happen. Yeah. And so I'm nervous about it.
Like today, you were nervous about today.
I was nervous about today.
But you're fine now.
Anxiety is I don't know what's going to happen. And that creates a sense of fear in me. And how does that fear look like? So it could be you're sweating, palms, your stomach hurts, your heart may be beating really, really fast. That's what anxiety is. How you know you're struggling with anxiety is, does that fear impact how you go to work, how you interact with other people? And the big thing, usually the big sign is panic attacks, which is the heart racing, can't breathe kind of things. Does it last longer than like 2-3 minutes? Does it last for hours, right? That's usually when you're struggling with anxiety. It's important to talk to somebody about it. I was someone who struggled with anxiety, but I didn't have the words. I didn't know
to recognize.
I didn't have the words. No, my parents didn't give me the words. That was not something that was talked about in the house. It only hit me when I was 19. I remember this. I was at a Subway. And I had a panic attack about something that was happening in the future. I didn't quite understand it, but I was like, that's what this is. Yeah. Like all my education finally was able to give me the words like, oh, this is what this is. Okay.
Which is, this is fascinating to me because you are an educated young man, and I'm so happy that you are willing to share it, because if it touches even one person who's watching, to make them feel safe to say, oh, this tall, educated black man is saying that he had this happened to me. So it's really normalizing it, where it's not a stigma. It doesn't mean that you're crazy. It's just that you are a human having a human emotion. And it's really recognizing it and knowing how to actually seek the help or learn to coping skills, because we don't talk about those things.
I think another good point that you bring up is, like you said, I have a master's degree, I have a job with health insurance that affords me the opportunity to get the help that I need if I want to choose to access that help, right? There are some people who don't have full-time jobs, right? Who lower income, they don't have the finances, the money, or the education to know how to get the help that they need. And I think I see that a lot more in immigrant communities than I do see in American people who are born in America. I think the way that I've seen the work done to get help to cope with things has been with, at least in Haiti, is so right? They were able to accomplish medicine in a community kind of way. So even though there are a lot of, even though there's Haitian attitudes towards mental health, that they're not sure whether or not they're going to be treated well. If we partner with, or if we go to a community that respects us, or that knows that it's not just the medical, there's a whole lot to look at. So the way that Partners in Health is another way to think about it. The way that Partners in Health was able to do the work is they established themselves in a community and worked in that community, every level, making a change. And I think that's how I want, if anyone takes anything away from this, is it's not just going to a therapist, and I know it's not just going to a therapist and letting all your problems go.
Yeah, and some people don't do well with traditional therapy.
It's not, yeah.
And so, although I'm a great advocate of therapy, but it doesn't necessarily work for everyone. But it's really recognizing that you're suffering and actually reaching out to someone.
Yes, that's important. Whoever that person is, whether that's your family, whether that's a friend, whether that is your doctor, whether that's your pastor or priest, that could be a neighbor, whoever it is that you trust, that you can talk to someone about. That starts there. You start with your community first. And if you don't have that community, the good way to start it is to reach out to your doctor.
Absolutely. So, no, Malcolm fa anpil gale la ke mbap ka traduit tout bagay yo net, mais ça m'de pati m'ble traduire c'est toujours ap encourager moun al nan thérapie, mais moi reconnaître que thérapie traditionnelle pas travail pour tout le monde. Et pas tout le monde qui kal nan office on thérapeute pour chita pour parler pour une heure de temps pour parler des émotions yo. Gen de fois, mais si ou senti ou ap souffrir, pas souffrir en silence. Si ou gon zami, ou gen yon famille, ou ka parler à docteur, pasteur, prêtre, parler avec un monde, parce que en pile ça qui fait mal, c'est l'heure où tant de un jeune petit monde prend la ville tuer tête li, et puis tout le monde était grand pile monde naturel, et pas tant pour lutter pour contre les gen famille gen amis, mais il tape souffrir en silence. So même si nous pas prend rien dans émission ça je dis, mais si vous sentez ou souffrir, cherchez un monde, parler avec un monde. Et si ou pas gen monde, parce que li possible gen monde qui pas gen monde, gen un numéro que ka rele, m'pral bay numéro am ka wesin ka écrit sur écran, even though it's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, but they can also connect people to other ways to get help. Si ou senti ou pa gen, si ou pa gen docteur, ou pa gen moun ou ka pale, ou ka rele 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255. That's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Ou bien tout, ou ka text hello to 741-741. So gon cell phone ou ka text hello to 741-741. Numéro ça travaille 24/24. Dans la vie ça, li très important parce que me connais gan moun qui rete qui vivent pour compte mais pour pas sentir pour compte parce que li pas bon pour nous perdre en vie. Parce que émotion nous a souffri. So gen gens nous ka joindre aide. Si ou gen docteur c'est premier partie on connecte à docteur pour le cas connecter avec un thérapeute ou connecter un programme, mais nous comprenons que traditional therapist pas travail pour tout le monde. Gen ti moun lè yo pas senti ou bien c'est un sport yo vinn faire ou bien gen danse, gen différentes activités ou bien gen ti moun c'est poésie yo écrit, gen ti moun qui gen tout différents gens pour ka express émotion sans c'est pas nécessairement aller dans traditional therapy, although I support that, but gen l'autre option pour ça tout. So going back to the family, because I think we kind of touched upon on the family as a whole, how important it is to have communication to help our children identify their feelings. But, you know, I think the conversation we're having right now, and I've been encouraged by how much conversation that's actually happening around our community, the Black community, about mental health, and even Black men speaking on it. And that's why it was so important to me to at least start this conversation, because often we see behaviors, people making terrible choices because they're suffering. So I think, you know, I guess there wasn't too much a question in this verbiage, but I wanted at least to get your take on your own views on how we're evolving right now as a community.
You started off the conversation by saying June is Black Men's Mental Health Awareness Month.
Yes.
And it's also Father's Day.
Father's Day, yes. Shout out to all the
Father's Day
dads.
is coming up in June. So the thing that I want to make sure is, yes, I think people are, the more that stigma is being talked about, the more people are able, especially around us, agencies, especially hospitals, are having conversations on how to create a fair and just system so that it's easy for Haitian Americans, people of color, Black Americans, to access treatment the same way that everyone else accesses it. It shouldn't have to be so hard to get the help that we need when we want it. So I see that conversation happening. I see more Black men and women seeking help, and that's good. It's still a stigma that we have to break because of all the history that's been there. And so I encourage everyone to, again, to just talk to someone, whoever that person is. Find ways to express what you want to express. Specifically when it comes to Black men, we know the pressures that Black men are under.
In this country,
especially in this country. We're not talking about the roles that men play in the household or the men play in society. In this country especially, what we see men unjustly treated, killed, more so than we ever have, right? It's more public.
Especially with social media. It happened before, but now it's in our faces.
It's in our faces, yep. And if you have a young Black child, you're raising a Haitian son, right? And you see this happening, you have to make sure you have a conversation, because these are things that connect to feelings of, like, am I loved? Am I worthy of being in America? Even, right? Do people respect the skin that I have? And if we dig a little deeper about the role that men play in society, or the pressures that they put on themselves to contribute, especially in the Haitian household, that's like, if you're not producing, you're not a man, right? If you're not able to take care of your family, that pressure is on you. And so we really want to make sure that men have the outlet that they need to talk about these things. Yes, it's changing, and that's a good thing. I want to just encourage everyone to make sure that we don't just stop right here. We have to take care of our own, and it starts by making sure that we know who our helpers are, we know who to turn to, and we know what we need to do to feel better and to feel well, because no one should ever suffer by themselves.
I agree.
Especially if you are a man struggling with your own emotions, struggling with addictions, whatever else that may be impacting you. Talk about those things. Get the help you need now, and don't suffer alone.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to extended relatives, or if somebody has a wife or a partner, to create that safe environment. To, you know, if you have a husband, to help him feel safe to be able to express his emotions. I think, talking to my sisters out there, I think Black women, we do stand up for Black men often, but there are some opportunities to do it more at home, because you have to be your partner's safety. You have to create that environment that he gets home, that you say, honey, how was your day? And actually listen. It's not so much you ask how was your day, but then you're occupied with other things, because you have to feel safe in your own environment. And I think those who are single, but it's good to have friends. I think when I think Motler, it might have been Motler or Eli, when they were here last time, they talked about having a circle of brotherhood. That, you know, men often, they have guy friends, but then they don't really talk about their emotions, because
and it's not like they need to talk about it in
Yeah.
the traditional way that we think about talking about it.
or the way that we females talk about it.
Yeah. I was trying to be nice.
No, you don't need to be nice.
Yeah, it's just as long as you have an outlet.
And that doesn't mean that you weren't being nice. To recognize that we are able to analyze and overanalyze our feelings. That's just how we've been given the safety to do that.
Yeah,
so.
and men don't have that safety
Yeah,
to do it.
yeah.
And so the way men typically do it is like what Eli was saying, right? Is the brotherhood, the
Yeah.
fellowship of
Yeah.
who you surround yourself with,
Yeah.
and how you talk about, or not even talk about, just how you express yourself with them, and getting the advice that you need to get you through a moment, whether that's with your family, whether that's with your own friends. Those are key things to talking about it, just as
Yeah.
long as we talk about it. Like if my brother's keeper, right, the mission by Obama is like, I'm a brother checking in with my other brother.
Yeah, that's
That's
important.
all it is. That's
Yeah.
huge. That's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, and I think I just lost my train of thought.
Oh, sorry, I had one thing when you
Yeah,
were
go
saying,
ahead.
sorry. The thing that was, when we don't talk, like we were talking, when we don't create that space in our house, I had a family that came to my mind that I used to work with a young person, a little boy, who struggled with anxiety, and he acted out. It looked like it's acting out, right? But we know there's more to it. If you dig deeper, like there's a lot more to this. There was trauma in this household that created an environment where it was so tense that this little person had no choice but to just act out.
Yeah.
When he was with me, that's all he would do is act out. And my work with him was working with the mom to just say, I hear you and I understand what you've been through, and I also need you to see how this is how you're creating this for him, and what he is trying to do is not trying to trigger you, but he's trying to express himself. And if you are better able to understand him and give him that space to just talk about what he wants to talk about, even though you have to take away that video game, at least you're doing it from a place of love as a place of anger. Those are two different things.
And I know that, you know, typically our initial topic is mainly about men and mental health, but I think, you know, we can't just talk about men and mental health, or mental health period, without talking about the family and raising children. And I'm glad that you brought this point up, because often, and I'm not a parent, but, you know, I have nieces, I have nephew, I have extended family, where often in the Haitian community we tend to blame the children. We tend, you know, Haitian parents are amazing when it comes to providing, creating a safe
They work hard.
They work hard, but I think the other work when it comes to the emotional, raising, you know, an emotionally stable person, you know, there's a lot of opportunity. There's opportunities
because they don't
there
have
for
their
us.
own. Some parents, some adults in the Haitian community, especially of the older generation, they weren't given the tools or the permission to not feel okay. What did they have to put up with? Political unrest. In some families, poverty, right? In some families, incarceration and community violence, right? And even up until more recently, the earthquake and the gang violence, and still the political unrest that's happening.
So they're
in
dealing
Haiti.
with their own trauma.
They're dealing with their own things.
Yeah.
And if no one taught them how to be okay with not being okay, right? And you're pushing through, just going to work, pushing through the issues that you may have with a partner in your household, right? Pushing through the stuff that you have to do with your kids. You don't have the emotional capacity to not give to your kid, and that's why it's important. It starts with you. It starts with creating a space for yourself and creating a space for your son.
So it all comes back full circle, and I think with this show, Uncause, we always talk about self-love. And so I think it does go back to you recognizing that you need to take care of you. You also need to show yourself love. You know, I was having a conversation earlier with a family member talking about self-love, because if you're not able to recognize your own emotions, to not only recognize and identify them and then have the best response to them, then when you're raising or you are in relation with someone else, then it can either create a safe environment or chaos. And I think the other piece, when you were talking about having support, it's also important for people to recognize when they are in a toxic environment, because you could be someone that you are feeling the way you're feeling because of the environment that you're in, and when it's safe enough to remove yourself. And I'm not just talking about domestic violence, I'm talking about even in friendship. You could have a circle of friends that's not necessarily bringing you or bringing the best out of you, and not actually helping you to grow, but it's to your detriment. So it's really having the strength and the courage to know when to remove yourself.
And I think for men especially, the things that I've seen or I hear in my own friend group that causes the struggle, or potential struggles with like anxiety, depression, and mental health, has a lot to do, or tends to circle around, like I said, talking about producing. So issues of work, like not making enough money, right? Issues with your family, the struggles that may be like, I'm not with my person, the mother of my children anymore, I'm not in a relationship with somebody, I'm struggling with my own relationships with myself, right? Those are some big things that in my own friend group I've seen men struggle with. And when they struggle with these things and they don't have the way to talk about them, that's when they struggle more, and that's when they may harm themselves and harm other people.
So, you know, I'm hoping that our friends that are watching are taking a lot away from this conversation. Nous parlons en pile de famille, parce que nous pas qu'à parler de santé mentale, pour nous pas parler de famille, parce que nous connaissons parents qui élèvent petit, qui viennent adultes, qui viennent grand monde dans société et puis qui fait petit. That's the circle of life. So one of the things, une bagay qui mal comme parler de gens en pile parents haïtiens, nous pas gagné, nous pas grandi dans un environnement qui te montre nous-mêmes qui gens pour identifier émotion nous. Parents haïtiens au travail du, nous connaissons nous remet petite nous, mais en pile fois nous-mêmes nous gain droit à souffrir en silence, nous pas gain langage pour nous expliquer, pour nous exprimer qui j'en nous senti nous. Et puis les ti moun nan nous bon problème, et pas parce que nous pas avlé non, mais nous pas connait qui j'en pour aider ti moun yo. So ça fait li important, et dans en causer nous toujours parler de l'amour pour tête ou parce que j'en monter tête ou que au gain l'amour pour c'est là qu'on est ou même un problème parler avec un monde, même si ou pas gain langage pour ta exprimer li, ou gain droit parler avec pasteur, même les pasteur prier avant, bien c'est dans l'église là, ou bien on frère dans l'église là, ou bien en famille, pendant à exprimer gens ou sentir là, then en pile fois tout gain droit venir découvrir qui gens ou réagir avec différentes circonstances. Et pas parce que c'est fort ou non, ou bien on te font bagay mal non, c'est juste dans la vie, en puis l'expérience qui doit arriver, et puis qui vient faire développer, et mon ou vin ou ya, et puis là ou vin parent ou gen difficulté, ou par contre qui j'en pour aider petit tout. So gen aide dehors, gen ou pas pour compte tout, so ça nous encourager, si tout garçon haïtien nous remet nous en pile. Si nous avons souffert, pas souffrir en silence. Parler avec nos amis, parler avec nos familles, parler avec docteur, parce que gain aide et ou important assez pour nous pour être vivant, pour être en santé. So Malcolm, we're coming to the end of our show. What else would you like to share with our friends? What's one few last words of encouragement that you have for our friends who are watching? And do you have any resources that you want to share with folks that might be suffering right now? And again, I know, guys, we only did a brief overview of men and mental health. We talked briefly about depression and anxiety. There's a lot more, and this subject is so vast that we will talk about it again, but this was really an introduction because we want it to be a normal thing that we as Black people talk about and that we address and we take care of each other.
I think first I'll share the resources and the thing I think I want everyone to take away from this. So if people have access to the internet, I think it's important You can find a lot of good resources there. So if you are someone who's interested in seeking therapy for yourself, there's therapyforblackmen.org. There's also therapyforblackgirls.com. So it's a good way to find therapists of color, because we know sometimes it's difficult to find someone who, and especially like at a therapist, it's about the relationship. So sometimes it's easier to find someone who matches, who looks like you, because that breaks down some of the barriers that you feel like might bring.
You don't have to do a
help.
lot of explaining.
Yeah, you like, especially when there's not many of us that are out there.
Yeah.
It is hard to find the people you want to find, right? So the other is the Haitian Mental Health Network. That's hmnwork.org. That is a group of licensed professionals in the Boston area that are also here to help and guide everyone through the mental health system. You already gave the hotline information. So I think the big things I want to take away, I want everyone to leave here with is speak up, right? It's important to talk. It is not a sign of weakness from our brothers out there. It is not a sign of weakness to talk about if you're not feeling well. It's okay not to be okay. That is fine. You don't always have to push through when you don't feel okay. I think what is important is to talk when you don't feel it, right? Talk to whoever it is that supports you, talk to them. And I think that's the big thing I want to make sure everyone leaves with.
So thank you so much, Malcolm, for taking the time to have this conversation, to start this conversation. I hope that our friends who are watching was able to capture something from our discussion, and if they themselves are feeling a certain way, that we've encouraged them to reach out to someone, and we want to make sure that we're shedding light on this subject, and it's the first, but it's not the last time. So thank you so much, Malcolm, for being here with us. Yes, you are. Thank you, Malcolm, for being here today. Zami nou yo kap gade ya, merci en pile parce que nous te branché jodi. M'ta souhaité conversation ça, li c'est un commencement. Et première fois nous fait li nan cause, mais pas dernière fois, parce que j'aime dit nous Boston Caribbean Network, nous là pour communauté a, nous remet communauté a, nous voulons communauté a grandi, nous voulons communauté a en santé, et communauté a qui ça qui fait c'est filles garçons petit monde grand monde jeune monde, so nous besoin tout monde en santé. Santé mentale ou étant que santé physique. Si vous tête fait mal, ou vous ventre fait mal, ou après les docteurs, ou va le prendre comprimé. Si vous pas senti ou bien, si vous senti ou découragé, si vous senti ou bien mauvais pensée pour ta fait tout mal, li nécessaire pour chercher aide. Ou ka parler à docteur, Malcolm ba en pile information ressources qui dans internet là, mais si vous pas gain accès à internet, ou ka toujours les stations hein. Parce que Dominique a toujours parlé avec, ou bien demandé l'aurait les stations connectées à la station connecté avec tout, ou bien moi-même connais différents professionnels dans la communauté qui a aidé, et il y a un pile ressources qu'il a pour, même connais nous sommes une communauté qui est très religieuse, so parler avec leader religieux nous, parler avec docteur. Si vous avez un diagnostic, ou un diagnostic avec dépression, docteur diagnostic avec dépression ou bien anxiety, ça veut dire fou. Ça veut dire fou. C'est une maladie liée. Même genre, on qui dit, yo fait sucre, ou bien son monde qui a anxiety, ou bien son monde qui a dépression. Si médicament aide, prend médicament. Si vous allez dans thérapie, ça ou elle ka aide, allez dans thérapie. Priez. Nous encourageons ou quoi dans prier, mais bon Dieu bail et être humain intelligence pour étudier, pour créer médicaments, pour créer différents domaines qui ca aider au vivre en santé. Ou important, nous voulons être en santé, nous voulons vivre une vie qui avec cœur content, qui vous senti ou à l'aise. So là ou senti ou pas non ou même chercher aide parce que gain aide dehors. Nous souhaitons toute maman nous a passé une très belle journée qui n'a célébré. J'aime dire nous avant, nous remet nous apprécier nous. Maman c'est ou la vie. So bonne fête des mères à toute belle maman haïtienne qui a regardé nous aujourd'hui. Merci encore parce que vous branchez. Merci tout le monde pour support nous pour émission En Cause qui a grandi et qui a continué à grandir. Merci, à la prochaine.
Hello, Boston. You are listening to BCN, Boston Caribbean Network Radio. Yo.